Hello, my name is Roman Elliott, and my fellow colleagues of Jack Prater, Blair Johnson, Charles Bailey, and Jake Morris will be discussing today in our group, The Average White Guys, the NCAA drug testing and academic fraud cases. So furthermore with this, I'm going to touch on the legality of the NCAA drug testing and academic standards pertaining to our institutions across this country. The first point that I do want to get across is the NCAA's legal rights pertaining to the student athletes and how it implements its policies and procedures of drug testing and its academic standards onto these athletes throughout all the colleges and universities in our country. Though we see that they try to maintain a standard, there is a lot of, quote, wiggle room within our institutions to implement the drug testing upon student athletes and correctly implementing the procedures and the retaliations of failed drug tests amongst the colleges and universities at an equal rate that ensures that all student athletes are treated as equals. It does infringe on their Fourth and Fifth Amendment rights pertaining to their privacy and the individualist rights of student athletes and as government citizens of the United States. Pertaining to that is how, on to the second bullet point, with the government involvement within the NCAA, they pretty much gave the NCAA state power, which in turn gives a for-profit, billion-dollar organization the rights to essentially hold the personal rights and liberties of these student athletes to their own standards, and they're not completely or correctly implemented at an equal and fair way throughout the whole country. So furthermore, it goes on to institutional legal issues pertaining to how these drug testing and academic standards are implemented to the student athletes and the difference of your typical regular just academic student that goes there on full scholarship or not, or you got your student athlete that's on scholarship, and how the imbalance of academic standards are not on the same balance throughout the whole institutions or the NCAA. So furthermore, I'm going to pass this over to Jake to furthermore about what is academic fraud. Thank you.
So I'm going to give the overview of what academic fraud is, where most of these infractions occur, and who is in charge of the punishments. So academic fraud is defined as cheating, plagiarizing, having someone else do your tests for you, or writing papers for you, and unauthorized grade changes. And there are two types of academic fraud. One involves the institutional staff members that get involved, so your head coach or assistant coach, or other unpaid staff members, including volunteer coaches, volunteer tutors, or other students. And the second version is with the student athlete themselves and getting help from other student athletes. So it's kind of self-based and involve the fraudulent academic violations. So I'm going to go on to where most infractions occur, and they're starting to occur in most Division I sports programs, especially in men's football and basketball. And the reason that is these are revenue sports. And out of 368 cases, they were involved in 158 of them, which was 43% of the caseload. And as I said before, it's a problem because they are both revenue sports, so they make a lot of money for the NCAA. So the basketball programs make about $10.8 billion for March Madness and just TV contracts alone, as well as the football programs with the new college football playoff system and being televised for that. It's about $5.64 billion. So they make over $16 billion with just those two sports. So the real question is, do they really care about their grades because they're making so much money for the NCAA? So then I'm going to go on to who's in charge of these punishments. And there's two people that are institutions that are involved in these charges and punishments for these athletes. And number one is the institution, and the institutions are mainly in charge of these infractions because they deal with academic fraud and academics on a daily basis, unlike the NCAA, who's mainly a business and doesn't really care about academics. And the institution punishes other students that are non-athletes for academic fraud, so this is why they stick to punishing their athletes as well as their non-athletes. but the criticism is whether these penalties are harsh enough because they have a bias towards their own institutions, whether they want to put in effect violations that will deter their further future students coming in and their current student athletes. And the other institution that's involved is the NCAA, and they deal with infractions for all other academic or athletic violations, so why not be in charge of the academic side too? Which brings you to the question of whether they have enough resources to do this, because they're not totally involved with academics like the institution is on a daily basis. So I'm going to pass this on to Blair, and he's going to give specific cases for both drugs and academic fraud.
So the first case I'm going to talk about is an academic fraud case involving the University of Louisiana at Lafayette. And basically what happened is one of the assistant football coaches made fake entrance exams for 5 of the recruits to the football team. And allegations began to arise complaining that the test scores were fake and an investigation occurred. The coach denied any type of involvement and also would not cooperate with the investigation. But concluding with the investigation, it was proven that the coach did in fact create fake entrance exam scores for those 5 students, and he was obviously punished. But what happened is, basically the school was allowed to propose their own penalties to the Board of Infractions for the NCAA. And basically what that was for the coach to be put on probation for 2 years, to be fired from the school, and then to pay a $5,000 fine. And then on the other end, the school was given a reduction in scholarships and also put on a 2-year probation. So while they are able to propose their own penalties, like Jake said, the downfall of this is, are the penalties harsh enough? And what that comes back to is the fact that even though the coach may have been fired, he's able to be rehired at any other NCAA school that would want to have him as a coach. So in reality, that's probably going to happen. He probably will get rehired at another school, and the only thing he's going to have to do is go with that school in front of the Board of Infractions, so they can basically just tell him not to commit any more violations. So while there are a lot of penalties in place, it doesn't seem like they are harsh enough to really prohibit coaches or anyone else involved in the NCAA from committing these type of infractions. And now I'm going to pass it on to Charles.
Alright, so I'm going to talk about 3 things. I'm going to talk about the rules behind academic fraud, the skepticism behind that, and drug testing. So, in the Division I manual for 2015-2016, academic fraud is only mentioned once, and they don't have much other language in there about academic fraud, so it's not heavily addressed by the NCAA. Right now, they see it as a school's responsibility to deal with that, unless it involves an eligibility issue where they lose a year, like say they faked a transcript grade, or they faked a grade to remain eligible. So the protocol is, if they commit fraud and if it affects eligibility, they report it to NCAA, otherwise they don't. And otherwise, the only other academic fraud violations that are reported are ones that would be under impermissible benefits, like giving too much tutoring, too much help, too much advising, peer editing. And right now they have a 23-member academic cabinet that looks over these kind of issues, but they only meet 3 times a year for a day and a half at a time, so they're not able to get much done throughout that if they're only meeting for a few days out of the year. And one of the cabinet members has been quoted recently as saying, how much institutional autonomy do we want? How much oversight do we want? So she's questioning, and the rest of the board's cabinet's questioning, how much oversight does the NCAA really want to deal with? How much can they actually control what's going on at institutions? And then they're trying to figure out a logical solution to this and make reform efforts. But there's heavy skepticism among the critics. One saw it as a diversion tactic from an actual blatant issue at UNC, because it seems like the NCAA has been more focused on the redefinition of academic fraud than actually addressing the issue of academic fraud and doing something about it. Others have said the NCAA is afraid to actually address it and investigate it fully because the NCAA is afraid to tarnish the public trust in them with them facing lawsuits and unionization attempts. And it could also take away their biggest weapon against paying student athletes, because if they can't regulate their academics, then they're just basically athletes instead of just students too. But there has been no change in academic legislation since 1983, but it appears that they're going to be voting upon some new regulation in April 2016. So on to drug testing, there's no complete list of banned substances. There's medical exceptions that can be acquired, but there has to be adequate documentation, and schools are required to provide education of rules and procedures to their student athletes on a regular basis. And their main focus is on new transfers, since they're not going to be in with the regular class. These are the 8 classes of banned drugs for the NCAA. As you can see, there's some common ones that most people would understand what they are, like anabolic agents and stimulants, alcohol, street drugs, anti-estrogens, because that blocks the estrogen that's produced from using steroids. And these are the drugs and procedures that are also regulated. Blood doping, which adds extra oxygen to the blood. Local anesthetics under some conditions. They weren't very specific about that through their manual. Obviously, manipulation of urine samples is really frowned upon. That's automatic failure. Beta-2 agonist permitted only by prescription inhalation. Caffeine also can't be more than 15 micrograms per milliliter in the urine sample. And supplements has also been a major issue, especially as of late throughout the whole country, not just through NCAA athletics. Student athletes are given that responsibility of what they put in their body. They're told they take it at their own risk to see their own risk of losing eligibility if they fail a test through taking supplements. It's their responsibility to ask their trainers and their athletic staff if it's legally used, look at the ingredients. And selection testing, they're subject to year-round testing in Division 1 and Division 2. Division 3 is only subject to testing through the championships. And this may be based upon basically anything like their sport, position, playing time, competitive ranking, their financial aid status through athletics. It can also be directed testing for some reason, or NCAA can just come in, have a random test if they see fit, and they can have any combination of these determine a reason for them to have a test. And generally, institutions are given up to 2 days prior notice before they come in and drug test. The consequences are pretty severe. You lose 1 full year of eligibility, and you have to sit out for 1 full season. Even if it's like in the middle of the season, you'd be eligible the next full season when it happened, the prior one. However, if you test positive for a PED twice, then you're banned permanently. And appeals are allowed if you do fail, and medical exceptions can be given as an appeal even after you fail the drug test, even though you're supposed to have it in before. And with that, I'm going to give it over to Jack.
I'm going to talk furthermore about the resolutions that we came up with. And first, I want to say that there's no immediate resolutions for this. The NCAA has been known for corrupt organization over time, and there's nothing that they could do within these next couple of years that would change their reputation and change these regulations completely. So we did come up with a 4-step process, and what we do believe is that the academic fraud will be handled first, because there's a lot more cases on that than there are on the drug testing scandals. So we think that there'll be more action on that in the foreseeable future. But into our 4-step process, the first step would be exploit the violations to the public. We feel that there's not that much that media doesn't cover and exploit these violations enough to where that people actually notice them and will actually want to do something about them. We think that if they do exploit them to their extent to which these schools are getting away with, these academics, these athletes cheating on tests and getting around drug tests, that they will actually demand for action. One thing that they have not done is follow up on investigations. Over time, it's been seen that there's still ongoing investigations over 10 plus years. For example, UNC, their academic fraud violations still going on. So one thing we believe is to follow up on those investigations. Step two, the NCAA will be then forced to take more action, and them seeing this action, people will probably force them to come up with more regulations and stronger punishments for these student athletes that are getting away with these violations. Step 3 and 4. Step 3, the NCAA will create new policies for these, for the drug testing and academic fraud scandals. We think that these policies will be more clear, so everybody will know what they can do, what they can't do, and the punishments will be much more strict, so they will be less likely to go through with them because they know that they will be in much more trouble and won't be able to play. Athletes and coaches will be held accountable. We've seen that in many cases that coaches are aware, as they were saying earlier, of what's going on, but they don't do anything about it. And these new policies that are created, they will be much more strict upon the follow-up of how quick they will be conducted. Also, step 4 will be work towards a new image. We believe that it will take a good amount of years, maybe a decade, for the NCAA to come up with a better image. And this image includes the athletes, the NCAA, professors, and it includes all these people because they're likely the ones to be involved. We want athletes to be held accountable for their education and not just go there to play football. There's been many situations that are arising in the drug testing where athletes are starting to get around drug tests. They'll get them delayed if they can. Coaches will delay them if it's a big-time athlete. And also, in the Syracuse example, the athletes failed 3 drug tests, but they were school drug tests, so they weren't held accountable for it by the NCAA. And so that's another investigation on Syracuse. And it just goes to show that school drug testing and NCAA drug testing, there's kind of a gray area, and there needs to be new policies enforced so that way this problem won't happen again in the future. To conclude, the NCAA needs to revise their regulations and punishments to where it's fair and these athletes won't do them again. They need to come up with new contracts with the universities, Division I through Division III, so they don't have these confusing and long-lasting investigations. We think that in order for them to build a new reputation, they need to focus on integrity instead of just making as much money as possible. And through these steps that we have given, we think that they can do that over time. And hopefully the athletes will be able to gain more of an education and they can build a better reputation over time. And that's all.